Tunisia, May 1943. The Afrika Korps has surrendered. 275,000 German and Italian soldiers march into captivity, and the desert is littered with abandoned equipment. An American war correspondent named Ernie Pyle, already famous for his dispatches from the front, spots something in the wreckage. A small, odd-looking vehicle with a flat nose and bucket seats. He climbs in, turns the key, and becomes one of the first foreigners to drive a Volkswagen. What Pyle does not know is that he has just discovered the vehicle American soldiers will soon be trading their own Jeeps to get. 2 Jeeps for 1 German bucket car. That was reportedly the going rate. This is the story of a vehicle that one American evaluation dismissed as inferior in every way to the American Jeep, except in the comfort of its seating accommodations. A vehicle that American generals would eventually order confiscated because too many soldiers were stealing them. A vehicle so good that the same army that dismissed it published a complete maintenance manual just so troops could keep their captured examples running. The Koobel-vahgen was not supposed to be better than anything. It was supposed to be cheap, simple, disposable. Instead, it became the trophy every American soldier wanted to bring home. Chapter 1. The trade that made no sense. The numbers do not add up. And that is precisely the point. The Willys MB Jeep had a 60-horsepower engine. The Koobel-vahgen had 25. The Jeep had 4-wheel drive. The German vehicle had only 2. The Jeep could tow artillery pieces weighing over half a ton. The Koobel-vahgen struggled with anything heavier than a machine gun. By every metric that military procurement officers cared about, the American vehicle was superior on paper. Consider the production statistics. American factories produced 640,000 Jeeps during the Second World War. German factories produced 50,435 Koobel-vahgens. The ratio was roughly 12-to-1. American industrial might dwarfed German capacity. The Jeep won the production war before it began. And yet, in the field, something strange happened. American soldiers who captured Koobel-vahgen refused to give them up. Officers who should have known better requisitioned them for personal use. Mechanics who had access to unlimited Jeep parts chose instead to scrounge for German components. The phenomenon became so widespread that General George Patton himself had to issue orders addressing it. His diary records the frustration. Practically every enlisted member, he noted, had acquired German automobiles, wasting gasoline at a magnificent rate and cluttering up the road. The sequestration of these vehicles was ordered. Patton was not exaggerating. Reports from the Third Army's logistics officers documented hundreds of captured German vehicles operating without proper authorization. The medical corps was particularly notorious. Every enlisted medic, it seemed, had managed to acquire personal transportation. The roads behind the front lines were clogged with vehicles that did not appear on any official inventory. But orders rarely stopped soldiers from acquiring what they wanted. The Koobel-vahgen offered something the Jeep could not: comfort, fuel economy, reliability in conditions that destroyed American vehicles, and a certain undefinable quality that soldiers recognized immediately upon driving one. The Jeep was a workhorse. The Koobel-vahgen was something else entirely. The trading economy that emerged was never officially documented, but persists in veteran accounts and regimental histories. For trading purposes in the U.S. Army during World War II, a Koobel-vahgen was reportedly worth 2 Jeeps. Some accounts suggest the rate was even higher in certain units. A captured Schwimmwagen, the amphibious variant, could command 3 or 4 Jeeps. Understanding why requires going back to 1938, to a designer named Ferdinand Porsche, and to the twisted logic of building a people's car for a nation preparing for war. Chapter 2. The People's War Car. The Koobel-vahgen was never supposed to exist. Ferdinand Porsche had spent years designing the Volkswagen Beetle as a civilian vehicle, a car for ordinary Germans who could not afford the Mercedes and Opels that wealthy families drove. Adolf Hitler had championed the project as propaganda, proof that National Socialism could deliver prosperity to the working class. The KDF Stadtwagen factory, later renamed Wolfsburg, was built specifically to manufacture millions of these people's cars. The numbers behind the civilian project were staggering. The factory was designed to produce 1,500,000 vehicles per year, which would have made it the largest automobile plant in the world. German workers contributed to a savings scheme, paying 5 Reichsmarks per week toward their future Volkswagen. By 1939, approximately 336,000 Germans had enrolled in the program. None of them received a car. Then came September 1939, and everything changed. The Wehrmacht needed light transport vehicles, and they needed them immediately. Germany's invasion of Poland had revealed serious deficiencies in military logistics. The army was relying on a bewildering variety of civilian automobiles pressed into service. Mercedes staff cars, Opel trucks, BMW motorcycles, Horch command vehicles. Each brand required different spare parts, different maintenance procedures, different fuel requirements. Standardization was impossible. Breakdowns were constant. Something had to change. The numbers were damning. German forces in Poland operated over 100 different vehicle types. Spare parts logistics became a nightmare. A single infantry division might require components from 20 different manufacturers. Mechanics could not be trained on every vehicle. Repair depots overflowed with machines awaiting parts that never arrived. In January 1938, even before the war began, the Wehrmacht had ordered Porsche to develop a military version of the Beetle. The project designation was Type 62. Porsche's team stripped away the curved bodywork and replaced it with flat steel panels that could be produced with minimal tooling. They raised the suspension for better ground clearance. They added 4 bucket seats, which gave the vehicle its name. Koobel-vahgen was short for Koobel-Sitzwagen, meaning bucket seat car. Soldiers shortened it to Koobel, and the name stuck. The first prototypes underwent military trials in late 1939. The results were mixed. Wehrmacht officers complained about insufficient power. They worried about the rear engine layout. They questioned whether a 2-wheel drive vehicle could possibly compete with purpose-built military trucks. Some advocated canceling the project entirely. The critics had valid concerns. 25 horsepower was laughably underpowered compared to the Jeep's 60. The rear engine placement meant the front wheels bore minimal weight, potentially compromising steering on difficult terrain. 2-wheel drive seemed like a fatal limitation for a military vehicle expected to follow panzer divisions through mud and snow. Then the army tested the Koobel-vahgen in snow, and everything changed. German military evaluation records show that the Type 62, despite having only rear-wheel drive, easily outperformed several 4-wheel drive reference vehicles in winter conditions. The secret was weight. At just 725 kilograms, the Koobel-vahgen weighed over 300 kilograms less than the Jeep. When it got stuck, 4 soldiers could lift it out. When it encountered deep snow, the smooth underbody allowed it to slide across the surface like a motorized sled, rather than digging in like heavier vehicles. The weight advantage was not accidental. Porsche had obsessed over every kilogram. The flat steel body panels were thinner than standard automotive practice. The chassis was minimalist. The engine, derived from the civilian Beetle, was already designed for efficiency rather than power. Every component was evaluated for weight savings. The Wehrmacht was convinced. Pre-production of the improved Type 82 began in early 1940, with mass production starting in August at the massive KDF Stadt factory. The workforce that built these vehicles tells a darker story that must be acknowledged. As the war continued and German labor shortages intensified, the factory increasingly relied on forced workers. By 1944, approximately 2/3 of the Wolfsburg workforce consisted of foreign workers, many of them prisoners brought from occupied territories and concentration camps. The vehicles that American soldiers would later covet were built by hands that had no choice. Production ramped up steadily despite Allied bombing. In 1940, factories produced roughly 600 Koobel-vahgens. By 1943, annual production exceeded 15,000 units. The peak came in 1944, when over 16,000 vehicles rolled off assembly lines, despite constant disruption from air raids. By the end of the war, German factories would produce 50,435 Koobel-vagens. They would serve on every front, from the frozen steppes of Russia to the burning sands of North Africa, and American soldiers would discover them in every theater of the war. Chapter 3. The engineering that defied logic. The specifications tell a story of elegant compromise. The engine was an air-cooled flat 4 displacing roughly 1 liter to 1.1 liter depending on production year. Maximum power output ranged from 23 to 25 horsepower at 3,000 revolutions per minute. Maximum torque was approximately 68 newton-meters at 2,000 revolutions per minute. Top speed was 80 kilometers per hour.
Illustrations showed proper jack placement, engine access procedures, and tire changing techniques. The Army does not publish maintenance manuals for vehicles it does not expect soldiers to use. Think about what this document represents. On the day that approximately 156,000 Allied soldiers launched the greatest amphibious invasion in history, someone at the War Department was preparing instructions for maintaining captured German vehicles. The planning staff knew what would happen when American troops encountered Koobel-vagens. They would keep them. Photographs from the European theater tell the rest of the story. At the 12th Armored Division Memorial Museum in Abilene, Texas, a photograph shows Staff Sergeants Vernon Woozy, Kenneth H. Henn, and Daniel Furden posed in a captured Koobel-vagen. Woozy was known as Montana Wildcat. H. Herndon was called Hillbilly. Furden answered to Baldy. 3 American sergeants grinning in a German vehicle somewhere in the European theater of operations. The photograph captures something essential about the American relationship with captured German equipment. These were not soldiers posing with enemy weapons to document intelligence value. They were men showing off a prize. The Koobel-vagen represented victory in its most tangible form, something valuable taken from a defeated enemy. Similar photographs exist by the hundred in archives across the United States and Britain. American paratroopers crossing Corentin in a captured Koobel-vagen. Soldiers of the 100th Infantry Battalion, 442nd Regimental Combat Team with a swim-wagen captured during the Battle of Leghorn on July 12, 1944. American nurses riding in a captured amphibious vehicle marked with invasion stars. Medical Corps personnel transporting supplies in German bucket cars. The Koobel-vagen was not just tolerated, it was celebrated. The trading economy that emerged defied official documentation but persisted in veteran accounts and military history forums. Whether the famous exchange rates were literally accurate or simply soldier folklore, they reflected a genuine hierarchy of desirability that put German vehicles above American ones. The reasons were practical and immediate. The Koobel-vagen's bucket seats, positioned within the axle lines, kept passengers secure without seatbelts through maneuvers that would throw Jeep occupants against the bodywork. The lower center of gravity dramatically reduced rollover risk. Jeep rollover deaths, while statistically insignificant in the broader casualty figures, were alarmingly high for a non-combat cause of death. Soldiers noticed. The fuel economy mattered to soldiers who had to scrounge for petrol. A Koobel-vagen could travel twice as far on the same amount of fuel as a Jeep. In a theater where supply lines stretched hundreds of kilometers and fuel was constantly scarce, this advantage was not abstract. It was the difference between reaching your destination and walking the last 20 meters. War trophy regulations officially permitted retention of captured equipment. An August 1944 War Department document stated that such retention was considered to be for the service of the United States and not in violation of the 79th Article of War. Officers required certificates signed by superior officers. Enlisted men faced more scrutiny but found ways around the regulations. The 28th Infantry Division provides one statistical snapshot of the trophy culture, a Koobel-vagen.
Veterans who survived to tell their stories often mentioned the captured vehicles with particular affection. One former sergeant from the 3rd Armored Division recalled that his unit acquired 3 Koobel-vagens after the Falaise pocket in August 1944. The company commander kept one, the first sergeant kept another. According to some accounts, 5,000 men from that division left the European theater with as many as 20,000 war trophies between them. Most were pistols, flags, and smaller souvenirs, but vehicles were prized above all. The Luger pistol was the most famous trophy of the war, but the Koobel-vahgen was the most useful. A soldier could show off a Luger to his friends. He could actually drive a Koobel-vahgen. The third became shared property for anyone who needed to run errands. Nobody complained. The vehicle simply worked better for daily driving than the Jeeps. Another veteran, a mechanic with the 7th Army, remembered being ordered to service captured German vehicles alongside American equipment. The Koobel-vagens were easier to work on, he noted. Everything was accessible. Everything made sense. The German engineers had thought about the poor bastard who would have to fix these things in a muddy field somewhere. Patton was not the only senior officer who noticed the problem. Across the European theater, commanders issued similar confiscation orders, but enforcement proved difficult everywhere. How do you stop soldiers from using captured vehicles when those vehicles are often better than official issue? The answer, as it turned out, was that you could not. Soldiers continued acquiring Koobel-vagens until the supply of abandoned vehicles was exhausted. Then they moved on to other German equipment, always searching for anything that might make their lives slightly easier in a war that offered few comforts. Chapter 6. The Cousins. The Koobel-vahgen was not the only German vehicle Americans coveted. An entire family of innovative designs emerged from the same Wolfsburg factory, each with its own admirers among Allied forces. The Schrimmwagen, officially designated Type 166, represented an even greater engineering achievement. Where the Koobel-vahgen could only drive on land, the Schrimmwagen could swim. A watertight hull, a retractable propeller mounted at the rear, and 4-wheel drive made it the most capable amphibious car ever produced. The specifications are remarkable. The Schrimmwagen weighed 910 kilograms, slightly more than the Koobel-vahgen due to the watertight hull. The engine was a larger 1,131 centimeter unit, producing 25 horsepower. On land, top speed was 80 kilometers per hour. In water, the propeller drove the vehicle at approximately 10 kilometers per hour. Production figures tell the story of rarity. German factories built 15,584 Schrimmwagen between 1942 and 1944. Production ceased when Allied bombing destroyed the manufacturing facilities. Today, only 189 survive in any condition. Just 13 exist without restoration. Auction prices regularly exceed $100,000. The American equivalent was the GPA, nicknamed the Seep for Sea Jeep. It was universally despised by the soldiers forced to use it. The Seep weighed 1,630 kilograms, nearly twice as much as the Schrimmwagen. It sat lower in the water, making it vulnerable to swamping. It was slower both on land and in water. American soldiers who encountered Schrimmwagen understood immediately why the Germans had built something better. When British forces captured the Wolfsburg factory in April 1945, they found working Schrimmwagen among the equipment. Accounts describe soldiers holding informal competitions, driving the amphibious vehicles off wolves into the Mittelland Canal at 40 miles per hour with a great splash. The vehicles survived these tests, which tells you something about their construction quality. The Kettenkrad occupied a stranger place in American imagination, half motorcycle, half tank. The SDKFZ, too, looked like nothing else on the battlefield. A motorcycle saddle and handlebars sat above a tracked chassis. The driver steered at low speeds using the handlebars and at high speeds using braking on individual tracks. Maximum speed was 70 kilometers per hour, approximately 50 miles per hour, making it the fastest half-tracked vehicle of the war. Production numbers for the Kettenkrad reached 8,345 units between 1940 and 1945. The vehicle weighed 1,235 kilograms and could tow payloads exceeding 450 kilograms. German forces used Kettenkrads for tasks that would have seemed absurd to American logisticians. They towed Messerschmitt Me-262 jet aircraft to runway positions, conserving precious aviation fuel. They transported supplies through terrain impassable to wheeled vehicles. They served as mobile cable layers for communications units. Allied forces who captured Kettenkrads discovered a vehicle of remarkable agility and surprising durability. Captured examples were ridden by British 8th Army soldiers in North Africa and American soldiers in France. Though spare parts were nearly impossible to obtain, the tracked chassis required specialized maintenance that Allied mechanics had not been trained to provide. The BMW R75 and Zundap KS750 motorcycles with driven sidecars earned descriptions as the glamour machines of the Second World War. Unlike American motorcycles, which drove only the rear wheel, these designs powered both the rear wheel and the sidecar wheel through a locking differential. The result was genuine off-road capability that American Harley-Davidsons and Indians could not match. The specifications tell the story. The BMW R75 had a 745-centimeter opposed twin engine, producing 26 horsepower. Top speed was 92 kilometers per hour. The driven sidecar wheel could be engaged or disengaged as needed, providing three-wheel drive for
difficult terrain. Production of both models totaled approximately 35,000 units during the war, with the BMW R75 accounting for around 16,500 and the Zundap KS750 contributing roughly 18,700. They served on every front, from the Russian steppes to the North African desert. The United States Army was sufficiently impressed to order a copy. Harley-Davidson engineers, according to contemporary accounts, simply converted metric measurements to inches when designing the XA prototype. The result was a motorcycle with an air-cooled opposed twin engine, shaft drive, and hand-shifted gearbox, all features copied directly from the BMW design. Only 1,000 were built before the war ended, and the program was canceled. Even German trucks found American admirers. The Opel Blitz used an engine so similar to General Motors designs that Allied mechanics could repair disabled examples using Chevrolet and Bedford parts. German efficiency had inadvertently created compatibility with American supply chains. Captured Blitz trucks were repainted with Allied markings and pressed into service throughout the European theater. Chapter 7. The Verdict History Ignored. The official American assessment remains on the record. One U.S. evaluation dismissed the Koobel-vahgen as inferior in every way except in the comfort of its seating accommodations. This verdict contradicted the evidence from Aberdeen Proving Ground. It contradicted the testimony of British mechanics who drove captured examples thousands of kilometers. It contradicted the behavior of American soldiers who traded 2 jeeps to obtain 1 German vehicle. It contradicted the publication of Technical Manual E9803 on D-Day itself. The contradiction reveals something important about how militaries evaluate equipment. Official assessments serve institutional purposes. They justify procurement decisions. They maintain morale. They reinforce narratives of Allied superiority that were essential to the war effort. Acknowledging that the enemy had built a better light vehicle would have been politically inconvenient. The American industrial achievement was genuine and overwhelming. 640,000 Jeeps compared to 50,000 Koobel-vahgens, 12-to-1 production advantage, unlimited spare parts compared to chronic German shortages. The Jeep was good enough, produced in sufficient quantity, and supported by logistics that German forces could only dream of matching.
But soldiers are not politicians. They evaluate equipment by a single standard. Does it work? Does it keep me alive? Does it make my job easier? By these standards, the Koobel-vahgen earned its reputation. The air-cooled engine that eliminated radiator failures, the lightweight construction that allowed recovery from mud without mechanical assistance, the fuel economy that stretched supply lines, the comfortable seating that reduced fatigue on long movements, the smooth underbody that crossed terrain where heavier vehicles bogged down. The numbers from post-war surveys tell their own story. Veterans who had driven both vehicles were asked which they preferred. The majority chose the Koobel-vahgen for comfort and fuel economy. They chose the Jeep for raw capability and the knowledge that spare parts would always be available. This was the fundamental trade-off that soldiers understood and official assessments ignored. The Koobel-vahgen was better as a vehicle. The Jeep was better as a part of a system. The post-war fate of the Koobel-vahgen confirms what soldiers knew. When British forces occupied the Wolfsburg factory, they initially planned to dismantle it. Germany would not be permitted to rebuild its automotive industry. The victors would ensure the defeated enemy could never again threaten their neighbors. But British officers who drove captured Koobel-vahgens reached different conclusions. They ordered 20,000 similar vehicles for occupation forces. By the end of 1945, the factory had produced 2,490 units under British supervision. The Volkswagen Beetle that emerged from this period became the best-selling car in history. More than 21 million were eventually produced. Ferdinand Porsche's design, condemned by British engineers as exhibiting no special brilliance, became the foundation of one of the world's great automobile manufacturers. Of the 50,435 Koobel-vahgens produced during the war, estimates suggest that roughly 1,000 survive today in various conditions. Perhaps 100 to 200 remain in the United States, scattered among museums and private collections. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans has one. The 12th Armored Division Memorial Museum has another. The Virginia Museum of Military Vehicles displays an example. Private collectors pay substantial sums for authentic examples with documented provenance. Most captured vehicles never returned home with their American captors. Official regulations classified large items like vehicles as property of the state rather than individual trophies. Shipping a Koobel-vahgen across the Atlantic required documentation that few enlisted soldiers could obtain. The paperwork was extensive, the inspections rigorous, and the shipping space limited. Many captured vehicles were simply used until they broke down, then abandoned or destroyed to prevent recapture. Others were left behind when units moved, passing to replacement troops who used them until they too moved on. The paper trail disappeared. The vehicles themselves vanished into the chaos of post-war Europe. The correspondents who first encountered these vehicles recognized something the official reports missed. Ernie Pyle drove his captured Koobel-vahgen through Tunisia and understood immediately why German soldiers valued them. The vehicle was not impressive by specification, it was impressive by experience. That correspondent, Ernie Pyle, driving through the Tunisian desert in May 1943, could not know what would happen next. He could not know that within a year, the United States Army would publish a manual teaching soldiers to maintain these captured vehicles. He could not know that American generals would complain about troops stealing them. He could not know that decades later, historians would still be asking why soldiers traded 2 of their own Jeeps for 1 German bucket car. But perhaps he understood in that moment what all the official reports and engineering assessments could never capture. Sometimes the best vehicle is not the most powerful one. Sometimes it is simply the one that works. Ferdinand Porsche designed a car for a regime that deserved to lose. His engineers built it in factories staffed by forced labor from across occupied Europe. Prisoners from concentration camps worked on production lines at Wolfsburg. This is one of the countless crimes of the National Socialist state. Nothing about the Koobel-vahgen's excellence excuses or diminishes those facts. Yet the vehicle itself, stripped of ideology, represented something genuine, a commitment to engineering elegance over brute force, a recognition that simplicity often outperforms complexity, a design philosophy that prioritized the needs of the soldiers who would actually drive these machines over the preferences of procurement officers who would never touch them. American soldiers understood this. They understood it when they captured Koobel-vahgen and refused to surrender them to motor pools. They understood it when they traded their own jeeps for German vehicles. They understood it when they posed for photographs, grinning in bucket cars that were supposed to be inferior in every way. The official assessment said inferior. The soldiers said something else. Ernie Pyle finished his drive through Tunisia and moved on to cover the Italian campaign. He crossed to France after D-Day and followed the American advance into Germany. He would die in April 1945, killed by Japanese machine gun fire on the island of Ieshima, one of the last American correspondents killed in the Second World War. But on that day in May 1943, driving a captured Koobel-vahgen through the wreckage of the Afrika Korps, he was one of the first Americans to discover what thousands would later learn. Sometimes the best vehicle is not the most powerful one. Sometimes it is simply the one that works.